The light Charleston rain spared no one, least of all those already on their knees. Jocelyn Erickson sat on the damp curb of Broad Street, clutching an umbrella that looked more like a white flag than protection. The fabric was torn, the metal ribs exposed like broken bones. In her lap, a crumbled envelope with the words "Final Notice" stamped in red. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for that, only the silent weight of someone who knew tomorrow would be even harder than today. And the worst part was, she wasn't falling alone. 3 weeks ago, she'd lost her job at the small bistro where she'd worked ever since dropping out of culinary school. The official reason was budget cuts. The truth, whispered behind closed doors, was something else. The owner didn't want a delicate situation in the dining room. Delicate. That was the word now used to define her 2-month-old pregnancy, the secret she still hid beneath loose shirts and forced smiles. The baby's father? He had disappeared before she even found out she was pregnant. He left nothing but a cold text message and an emptiness that burned far deeper than any heartbreak should. Jocelyn had learned the hard way that love and abandonment could live inside the same body. She opened the old recipe notebook she carried in her bag, pages stained with tomato sauce, filled with handwritten notes and the doodles of forgotten dreams. Lemon and basil risotto, rosemary bread with wild honey. Each title was a fragment of who she used to be, someone who believed that cooking was an act of affection, that every dish told a story, that seasoning and tenderness were one and the same. Now she could barely afford rent for a shared room, let alone fresh ingredients. But she kept writing. It was the only way to remember that once she had a purpose. The street was nearly empty. A few tourists hurried to find shelter, their colorful umbrellas dancing in the storm. No one looked at her, and Jocelyn understood. Who wants to see their own fragility reflected in a stranger's eyes? She herself used to look away from the homeless, afraid to recognize in them the future waiting for her. But now, sitting there with the rain washing away what pride she had left, she realized how thin the line really was between having a roof and not. One missed payment, one lost job, one pregnancy at 27, and utterly alone. She brought her fingers to her nose, an old habit, almost unconscious. That morning she'd chopped parsley in the kitchen of the boarding house where she lived, making a simple omelet with the last few eggs she could afford. The scent still lingered under her nails, a faint reminder that she could still do something well, that there was still beauty hidden in small gestures, that maybe life wasn't only about surviving, but about finding reasons to keep seasoning her own path, even when no one else was there to taste it. The wind picked up, a cold gust cutting through the thin fabric of her blouse. Jocelyn shivered, not just from the cold. She trembled because, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel real fear. Fear of failing. Fear of letting down someone who hadn't even arrived yet, but already depended on her for everything. Fear that love, the kind she imagined giving her child, wouldn't be enough to pay bills, put food on the table, provide a safe crib. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the tenderness she carried in her chest couldn't hold up an entire life? Then she heard it. The sound. An engine slowing down, tires sliding on wet asphalt. A shadow of a car stopped beside her, black, elegant, out of place in that scene of despair. The window rolled down slowly, and through the haze of rain, Jocelyn saw a pair of eyes watching her, not with pity, not with disdain, but with something she couldn't name, something that made her heart beat differently, as if fate itself had just pulled over, disguised as a stranger in an expensive car.
The glass was fogged from the inside, but she could still make out the outline of a man's face, serious, almost austere. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, He just sat there, watching her with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in months, and that was both comforting and terrifying. Jocelyn pressed the envelope against her chest, instinctively protecting herself from a kindness she wasn't sure she could trust. Because kindness, she had learned the hard way, didn't always come free. And she had nothing left to pay with. "Are you okay?" His voice cut through the rain, deep and steady, each word measured, as if he weighed it before speaking. Jocelyn hesitated. Was she okay? Of course not. But what do you tell a stranger who stops his car to ask about your ruin? That you're pregnant, unemployed, and about to be evicted? That the only thing you can swallow these days is the bitter taste of defeat? She shook her head, trying to look stronger than she felt. "I'm figuring things out." The lie came out thin, almost pathetic, and he didn't seem to believe it for a second. Nathaniel Callahan, though she didn't know his name yet, studied the scene with eyes trained to notice details: the broken umbrella, the soaked bag, the red envelope in her lap, the way her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world pressed against them. He recognized despair when he saw it. He'd spent enough time avoiding his own to spot it in others. And something about that woman, maybe the quiet dignity with which she held her head high, even sitting on the ground, kept him from driving away. "Get in the car. I'll take you somewhere dry." It wasn't a request, it was almost an order, but softened by a genuine concern that caught her off guard.
Jocelyn looked at the car door as if it were a portal to another universe, one she didn't belong to. "I don't need charity." The words came out sharper than she intended, but pride was all she had left, and she clung to it like driftwood in the middle of the ocean. Nate tilted his head slightly, and for the first time, something close to a smile touched the corner of his lips. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a dry conversation and maybe a cup of coffee. You can decide whether to take it or not." She bit her lower lip. Hunger growled in her stomach, a humiliating reminder that she'd skipped lunch and breakfast, and, if she were honest, dinner the night before too. The baby inside her deserved more than a mother too stubborn to accept help. Jocelyn took a deep breath, carefully closed her recipe notebook, and stood up. Her legs trembled, part exhaustion, part fear of the unknown, but she opened the car door and got in, immediately feeling the brutal contrast between the cold outside and the soft, warm leather inside. The air smelled of fine wood and something citrusy, refined, a world completely different from hers. Nate watched her through the rearview mirror as he adjusted the heater. She was soaked, shivering, but there was something about her that deeply intrigued him. It wasn't just her delicate beauty, though she was beautiful, in a quiet, almost hidden way beneath the fatigue. It was the way her fingers touched that wet notebook with reverence, as if it were the most precious thing she owned. "What's your name?" he asked, breaking the silence as the car glided through Charleston's historic streets. "Jocelyn," she said softly, still not looking directly at him. "Jocelyn Erickson." And then, because exhaustion tears down the walls that reason keeps standing, she added, "And I really need a job." Something shifted in him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't hollow compassion, it was recognition, as if fate had placed this woman in his path for a reason at that exact moment under that same rain. Nate turned his eyes back to the road, but the words slipped out before he could stop them. "I have an opening, temporary, in my kitchen. If you can cook." Jocelyn slowly turned her head, eyes wide, heart racing, and for the first time in weeks, something other than fear bloomed inside her. Small, fragile, almost impossible to name, but it was there, beating quietly in her chest. Hope.
The Callahan mansion wasn't just big, it was imposing, as if it had been built to remind everyone that there were lines between those who had and those who didn't, and some of them could never be crossed. Jocelyn climbed the marble steps leading to the side entrance, guided by Martha Green, the housekeeper, sharp-eyed, her hands worn by decades of work. "This is the kitchen," Martha said, pushing open the heavy wooden door. And Jocelyn felt the air shift. The room was bright and vast, with granite counters that looked like they'd never known a pot truly boiling. Yet there was something there. Maybe the faint scent of dried rosemary on the shelves, or the apron hanging on the hook near the stove, that made her feel, somehow, that she could breathe again. Martha crossed her arms, studying the young woman with that quiet wisdom only age can bring. "He doesn't usually bring people home," she said, almost as a warning. "Especially not like this, out of nowhere." Jocelyn swallowed hard. Was she trespassing in a space that didn't belong to her? Had that man in the car acted on impulse, only to regret it later? But Martha's expression softened. She touched Jocelyn's shoulder lightly. "There's something in you he saw. I see it too. So show what you can do, dear, and don't be afraid to make a little noise in here. This kitchen's been too quiet for far too long." Jocelyn started slowly, respecting the unfamiliar territory. She opened cupboards, recognized spices she hadn't seen in months, felt the sharp weight of real knives, not the dull ones she used at the boarding house. She decided to make something simple, homemade bread. Not because it was impressive, but because bread was honest. It doesn't lie. It either rises or it doesn't. And she needed to prove to herself that she could still make something rise. As she kneaded the dough, her muscles woke up, her mind quieted. Each motion was a silent prayer. "Please let this work. Please let me be enough."
An hour later, the scent began to spread through the house. That unmistakable aroma of fresh bread baking, butter melting, comfort wrapped in warmth. Nate was in his office, reviewing financial reports that refused to hold his attention. But when the smell reached him, something inside his chest tightened. He closed his eyes, and for one brief, fragile moment, he was a boy again. His mother in the kitchen, flour on her hands, laughing as he stole pieces of raw dough. She used to make bread too. Always said that a house without the smell of food made with love was nothing but an empty building. And Nate realized right then that's exactly what his mansion had become. Empty. He went down the stairs quietly, guided by a curiosity he couldn't explain, stopped at the kitchen doorway, and just stood there, watching. Jocelyn had her back to him, pulling the loaf out of the oven with care, her face flushed from the heat, a strand of hair clinging to her forehead. There was something sacred in that gesture, the way she held the pan, the way she smiled when she saw the bread had risen perfectly, the way she inhaled deeply, eyes closed for just a second, as if, in that moment, all her pain had been left outside. Martha, beside her, smiled too, and Nate understood then. It wasn't just about food. It was about life returning to a place that had long forgotten how it felt to be alive. Jocelyn turned and saw him standing there, quiet, serious, almost intimidating in his stillness. Her heart jumped. I made bread," she said, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. But he simply nodded, walked over to the counter, and without asking, tore off a piece still steaming hot. He brought it to his mouth, chewed slowly, and then closed his eyes, as if tasting more than bread. He was tasting memory, nostalgia, the first good thing he had felt in years. When he opened his eyes again, there was something different in them, a crack in the armor he wore to keep the world at a distance. He didn't say a word. He just set the piece of bread back on the counter and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jocelyn stood frozen, her heart racing. Had she done something wrong? Was the bread not good enough? But Martha smiled, shaking her head gently. He liked it, dear. He liked it a lot, and that scared him. Jocelyn frowned. Scared him? Why? Martha sighed, glancing toward the door he'd disappeared through. Because he didn't expect anyone to make him feel again.
The first time Nate came down to the kitchen in the middle of the night, Jocelyn thought he was a thief. The old clock in the hallway had just struck 2 a.m., and she was sitting at the table, preparing a chamomile and ginger infusion, something to ease the morning sickness that, ironically, hit harder at night. When the door creaked open, she almost dropped her cup. But it was just him, barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a plain t-shirt that made him look less like a billionaire and more like a man. His hair was messy, his face tired. "Sorry," he said quietly, hesitant. "I didn't know anyone was here." She shook her head, still holding the cup like a shield. "I can't sleep either." He could have gone back upstairs. He could have said goodnight and disappeared into the shadows of the mansion the way he usually did. But something, maybe the warm light of the kitchen, maybe the comforting smell of the tea, maybe the way she looked at him without judgment, made him stay. "What are you making?" he asked, stepping closer, careful not to startle her. "Ginger tea," Jocelyn replied, stirring the spoon inside the cup. "Helps when your stomach decides to revolt." He sat across from her, keeping a respectful but present distance. "Are you sick?" There was genuine concern in his voice, and Jocelyn realized she wasn't used to that, to someone actually caring. "Not exactly," she said, choosing her words carefully. She wasn't ready to tell him about the pregnancy, not yet. But there was something about the stillness of that kitchen, the way night made people more honest, that made her want to share at least a fragment of the truth. "Sometimes the body reacts to stress in strange ways, and I've had a lot of stress lately." Nate nodded, as if he understood completely. "Stress is just a polite way of saying life decided to knock you down, isn't it?" She laughed softly, a sound she didn't expect. "Yes, exactly that."
He went quiet for a while, his eyes fixed on her cup, though his thoughts were somewhere else. "My mom used to make tea at night," he said suddenly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "She said nighttime was when the most honest thoughts showed up, and tea was a way to make peace with them." Jocelyn felt her chest tighten. There was pain in those words, an old kind, the kind that never really heals. "Was she a chef?" she asked, remembering vaguely that Martha had mentioned something about it. Nate nodded, and for the first time, a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "The best there ever was. Not because she cooked well, but because she put love into everything she made, like every meal was a letter of affection." Jocelyn felt her chest tighten. There was pain in those words, an old kind, the kind that never really heals. "Was she a chef?" she asked, remembering vaguely that Martha had mentioned something about it. Nate nodded, and for the first time, a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "The best there ever was. Not because she cooked well, but because she put love into everything she made, like every meal was a letter of affection." Jocelyn felt tears sting her eyes, but blinked them away. Love. What a strange, powerful, terrifying word. She had cooked with love once, for friends, for boyfriends who didn't stay, for herself when she needed to remember she deserved good things, and now she was there, brewing tea for a stranger who, somehow, didn't feel like a stranger anymore. "I think," she said slowly, "that cooking is one of the last acts of resistance we have left. When everything falls apart, we can still make soup, still bake bread, still season our own lives, even if it's just for one meal." Nate looked up at her, really looked, and what he saw in that young, tired woman, still holding on to a quiet, fierce dignity, completely disarmed him. "You get it," he said in a near whisper. "Most people don't. They think food is just fuel, but it's not. It's memory. It's connection. It's the only kind of love everyone can taste. Jocelyn smiled, and this time it was genuine. Exactly. And in that moment, the emptiness they both carried inside grew a little smaller. It didn't disappear, but shared. It weighed less. Hidden in the hallway, Martha watched, with her heart caught in her throat. She had known Nate since he was a boy, had seen the cheerful child turn into a man trapped inside his own walls. And now, for the first time in years, she saw a sliver of light breaking through those cracks. Jocelyn didn't know it yet, but she was changing that house, bringing back the scent of life. And Martha knew that was dangerous, because once you get used to something good, the thought of losing it hurts twice as much. So she prayed silently that fate would be gentle with those two broken hearts that, without realizing it, were beginning to mend inside each other.
The midnight conversations had become a ritual. Every night, around 2 a.m., Nate would come down to the kitchen and find Jocelyn already there, brewing different kinds of tea, mint with lemon, lavender with honey, pure lemon balm. They never planned it, never agreed on a time. They just knew the other would be there, as if their insomnia had conspired to create that sacred space where masks were unnecessary. And it was on one of those nights, 3 weeks after Jocelyn had arrived at the mansion, that Nate made a decision. He cooked dinner. Himself. With his own unaccustomed hands, guided only by childhood memories of watching his mother work her quiet magic among pots and spices. Jocelyn came down the stairs and stopped in the doorway, speechless. The table was set, not with the elegant formality she imagined from a billionaire's dinner, but with a comforting simplicity. Candles, plain ceramic plates, and the smell. God, that smell! Rosemary, roasted garlic, something rich and earthy simmering with red wine on the stove. "You cooked?" she asked, incredulous. Nate turned, holding a wooden spoon, and for the first time she saw something close to shyness on his face. "I tried. I don't know if it's edible, but my mother used to say that intention seasons better than salt." And Jocelyn felt warmth spread through her chest in a way she didn't expect. Because that wasn't just food. It was vulnerability served on a plate. They sat down. Nate served what he had made, wild mushroom risotto with thyme. It wasn't perfect. The rice was slightly too firm, the broth a bit thin, but it had soul. It had effort. It had a powerful man admitting he didn't know how to do something and doing it anyway. Jocelyn took a bite and closed her eyes. "It's delicious," she said. And she wasn't lying, because the taste didn't matter as much as the gesture. Your mother would be proud. She saw the emotion cross his face like a wave he couldn't hold back. Nate set down his fork and took a deep breath. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer. And I haven't been able to step into this kitchen to cook since, until you came." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, full of words that had been waiting to be spoken. Jocelyn reached across the table and, hesitantly, touched his fingers. A small, almost timid gesture, but one that carried the weight of deep understanding. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. And then, because his honesty deserved hers, because keeping secrets in that kitchen felt almost sacrilegious, she took a breath and let out the words that had been trapped in her throat for weeks. "I'm pregnant, Nate. 2 months. And the father, he didn't want to know. He left when he found out." Her voice trembled at the end, but her gaze stayed steady. "Because he needed to know. Because she needed to see what he would do with the truth." Nate didn't pull his hand away, didn't retreat.
Instead, he turned his palm upward and intertwined his fingers with hers, holding on firmly enough to make her want to cry with relief. "I know," he said quietly. And seeing her stunned expression, he added, "Martha told me. She noticed. And I was afraid you'd leave when you realized I knew. Afraid you'd think I was only being kind out of pity." Jocelyn felt the tears finally spill, warm and freeing. "And are you? Do you pity me?" He shook his head slowly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "No. I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Admiration, respect, and a strange urge to make sure you and that baby are okay." Martha appeared at the door then, carrying a small wooden box. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying in the hallway. "Mr. Nate," she said softly, "I think it's time." She placed the box on the table and quietly stepped out, leaving only the ticking of the clock to fill the silence. Nate opened the box carefully and took out an old framed photograph. A beautiful woman smiled at the camera, her apron dusted with flour, her hands mid-motion in the act of baking. "This is my mother," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And you know what's strange? You cooked like her. Not the recipes, the way, with your heart out in the open. Like every dish is a piece of yourself offered to the world." Jocelyn looked at the photo and saw not just his mother, but herself reflected there. She saw all the women who had used food as a language of love when words had failed them. Generations of affection, seasoned and served in bowls and baking pans, carrying the silent message, "You matter to me." And she understood in that moment that this kitchen wasn't just the place where she worked. It was where two broken hearts were learning to beat in the same rhythm, wrapped in the scent of rosemary and unspoken promises. It was where healing had quietly begun, without either of them realizing it. Nate held her hand in both of his now, his eyes shining with an intensity she had never seen before. "Stay," he said. And it wasn't an employer asking an employee. It was a man asking a woman not to let him fall back into the emptiness. "Stay here. Let me take care of you. Let me try to be someone you can trust." And Jocelyn, who had sworn never to depend on anyone again, who had promised herself she'd do everything on her own, felt her defenses crumble. Because sometimes courage isn't found in standing alone. It's found in accepting the hand of someone who's also learning not to be afraid to feel again.
The first photo was taken on a Saturday morning when Jocelyn went out to buy fresh herbs at Charleston's street market. She didn't notice the photographer hidden behind a flower stall, didn't hear the soft click of the camera capturing the moment she instinctively touched her belly, that unconscious gesture every expectant mother makes when she thinks about the life growing inside her. The second photo came 3 days later, when Nate picked her up at the mansion's back door, opening the car door for her with a care that went beyond common politeness. And the third, the most devastating, was taken through the kitchen window, showing the two of them sitting at the table, hands intertwined, faces close, wrapped in a quiet intimacy they could no longer hide. By the following Wednesday, the damage was done. "Billionaire and pregnant maid, romance or scandal," screamed the headlines across Charleston's most shameless tabloids. The photos were everywhere. On newsstands, phone screens, gossip sites multiplying like weeds. The story was crafted with the usual cruelty of a media starved for clicks. Jocelyn was painted as the schemer, the woman who'd gotten pregnant on purpose to trap the lonely billionaire. Nate was portrayed as the fool, the man who'd let loneliness cloud his judgment. And the baby? Just a sordid footnote in a story written to sell, not to tell the truth. Peter Lawson arrived at the mansion before 8 that morning, his face tight, a folder of newspapers under his arm. He didn't knock. He walked straight into Nate's office, where Nate was reviewing emails, and slammed the tabloids down hard enough to make the coffee cups rattle. "This has to end now." His voice was cold, calculated, stripped of empathy. The company's image is at risk. Investors are calling. The media's painting you as either a predator or a fool. Take your pick." Nate flipped through the papers, feeling fury boil in his veins. But it wasn't aimed at Jocelyn. It was rage at a world that turned something genuine into a circus, that made a pregnant woman's vulnerability into cheap entertainment. "She didn't do anything wrong," Nate said, his voice low but firm as steel. Peter laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "It doesn't matter what she did or didn't do. What matters is what they say she did. And what they're saying will destroy your reputation." He leaned across the desk, eyes hard. "You have two choices. Issue a statement saying she was just a temporary employee who's already been dismissed, or publicly admit you're in a relationship and face the storm that's about to hit. But you can't stay in this gray area."
Jocelyn found out through whispers. Martha had tried to hide the papers, but the new assistant cook hadn't been as careful. She'd left one on the counter, open to the page showing Jocelyn's face in close-up, captioned with venom. "Who is the mysterious pregnant woman who captured Nathaniel Callahan's heart and fortune?" The ground vanished beneath her feet. Her hands trembled. The nausea, which had eased in recent weeks, returned with brutal force. She ran to the bathroom and threw up, not from the baby this time, but from the humiliation burning in her throat. Because every cruel thing she'd ever believed about herself was now printed in black and white for the world to see. Once again, she was a mistake, a burden, a shame. When Nate finally found her, she was sitting on the floor of the room Martha had prepared for her, the suitcase open on the bed, clothes hastily thrown inside. "What are you doing?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. Jocelyn couldn't look at him, couldn't face the disappointment she was sure she'd find in his eyes. "I'm leaving. It's the right thing to do." Her voice came out cracked, pitiful, even to her own ears. "I shouldn't have stayed. I shouldn't have... God, I've made everything worse. Your life, your reputation, everything. I'm a mess, Nate. And you deserve someone who doesn't come with a suitcase full of problems." He knelt in front of her, took her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. And what she saw there wasn't disappointment. It was pain. For her. For them. "No," he said hoarsely. "You're not leaving. Not like this. Not because of lies printed by people who don't even know us." But Jocelyn shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "You don't understand. They're right. I am the pregnant maid who stumbled into your life. I'm someone with nothing trying to hold on to someone who has everything. And if I stay, they'll destroy you. They'll twist something good into something filthy until even you start believing the lies." She stood, pulling away from his touch, because if she stayed near him one more second, she wouldn't have the strength to go. "I have to leave. For you, for the baby, for me." And as she zipped up the suitcase, her heart breaking inside her chest, Jocelyn realized that leaving doesn't hurt less when you're the one walking away. It just hurts differently, like a voluntary amputation. Necessary, but brutal. And still, she left.
Nicole Zimmerman opened the door to her cramped apartment and found her friend standing in the hallway, drenched from the autumn rain, clutching a worn suitcase and wearing a look Nicole knew all too well. The look of someone who had given up. "Come inside," she said, pulling Jocelyn in before curious neighbors could start asking questions. The apartment was small, messy, smelling of old coffee and cheap-scented candles, but it was shelter. And Jocelyn collapsed onto the couch as if every bone in her body had vanished. Nicole sat beside her, draping an arm over her trembling shoulders, and said nothing. Sometimes, the truest form of love is the silence that lets someone fall apart without judgment. He tried to stop me from leaving, Jocelyn finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. He said he didn't care about the headlines, that we'd face it together. But, Nicole, you saw the papers. You saw what they're saying about me. Nicole pressed her lips together, anger simmering. Yes, she had seen. She had read every poisonous word. What they say doesn't define who you are, she replied firmly. But Jocelyn shook her head, burying her face in her hands. It defines what they'll do to his life, to his career, and I can't be the reason everything falls apart. The following days dragged on in a monotonous routine of survival. Jocelyn woke late, her body heavy not just from the pregnancy, but from the sadness that clung to her like a second skin. Nicole went to work, leaving notes on the fridge. Ate your yogurt? Sorry. I'll get another today. Love you. Small gestures of normalcy, reminding Jocelyn that even broken, there were people who cared. She began walking through the neighborhood in the afternoons, watching other pregnant women pushing strollers, wondering if she could be a mother on her own, if she would be enough, if her child would hate her for not having a father present. And every night, sitting by the window, she brewed chamomile tea and pretended she wasn't waiting for the phone to ring.
But the phone didn't ring. Jocelyn had blocked Nate's number before leaving the mansion, a self-preservation act that now felt like cruel self-infliction. She didn't know he had tried calling 17 times that first day, that he had sent messages that never went through, that Martha had to physically hold him back from going after her that first night, insisting that Jocelyn needed space to think, to breathe, to decide for herself what she wanted. If you truly love her, Martha had said, you'll respect her choice, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. At the Callahan mansion, silence had returned, but it was a different kind of silence than before Jocelyn, one that screamed absence. Nate wandered through the rooms like a ghost, pausing always in the kitchen where her scent still seemed to linger in the walls. The apron she had worn remained on the hook, the recipe notebook left on the counter, untouched, because he couldn't open it without feeling a brutal tightening in his chest. He dismissed Peter Lawson on the third day when the advisor suggested that moving on would be best for business. "Leave," Nate said, his voice dangerously calm, "and don't come back." Because some things were more important than reputation. There were people. There was love. One night, Martha found Nate sitting alone in the dark dining room, staring at a photo on his phone. Jocelyn smiling in the kitchen, flour on her nose, that rare smile that lit up her weary face. "You need to go get her," Martha said, her voice firm but gentle. Nate shook his head, bitter. "She made it clear she doesn't want me around, that I'm just another problem in her life." Martha sighed, sat beside him, and held his hand with the firmness of someone who had raised that boy. "She didn't leave because she doesn't want you. She left because she wants you too much, and is terrified of what that means. She's protecting you, protecting the baby, protecting her own heart that's already been broken before." She squeezed his hand. "But too much protection becomes a prison, darling. And you two are locking yourselves in separate cells when you could be building a home together." Nate sat in silence for a long time, Martha's words echoing in his mind. And then, slowly, like waking from a nightmare, he made a decision. He picked up his phone, opened his messaging app, and typed something simple, direct, and true. "I don't care about scandals. I don't care about headlines. I only care about you. And if you give me a chance, I'll prove that love doesn't have to hurt, that it can be shelter. Let me try." He hit send and waited, because sometimes all we can do is reach out a hand and hope someone grabs it back. That night, in Nicole's small living room, Jocelyn's phone vibrated on the table. She looked at the screen, saw his name, and her heart, which had spent weeks quietly mending itself,
cracked open once more, but this time not from pain, but from hope. The clinic was in a modest Charleston neighborhood, its cream-colored walls peeling, a sign promising affordable prenatal care. Jocelyn sat in the waiting room, hands clasped over the bump that was finally beginning to show, when the door opened and he entered. Nate Callahan, his face marked by sleepless nights, carrying a simple bouquet of white flowers, daisies, not expensive roses, as if he knew she didn't need ostentation, only sincerity. He saw her and stopped, as if he had forgotten how to breathe, and Jocelyn felt all the defenses she had built over the past weeks begin to crack, because no one had told her heart to keep guarding itself. Nicole, sitting beside Jocelyn, narrowed her eyes as Nate approached. Instinctively, she put her arm in front of her friend, as if to protect her from more pain. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp, protective. Nate didn't take his eyes off Jocelyn. "I needed to see you, to say things that couldn't fit in a text." He knelt right there in the middle of the waiting room, ignoring the curious glances of other expectant mothers and companions. There was no pride in this gesture, no calculation, just a man on his knees before the woman who had turned his world upside down and whom he no longer wanted to live without. "Jocelyn, please, listen to me." She wanted to stand and leave, wanted to scream that he couldn't just show up and disrupt the fragile balance she was trying to build, but her legs refused to obey, and her voice came out low, trembling, carrying all the exhaustion of someone who had fought alone for far too long. "Nate, you don't understand what happened, what's happening. People will keep talking. They'll turn our lives into a grotesque soap opera, and I can't raise my child in that environment." He nodded, understanding her fear. But he also understood that fear couldn't decide their future. "I know it's scary," he said, his voice rough, "but living without you is scarier, and I choose the fear that comes with you, not the emptiness that comes without you." Nicole watched silently, arms crossed, torn between her instinct to protect her friend and the uncomfortable realization that there was something genuine about this man. She had seen Jocelyn fall in love before, seen boyfriends promise the world and deliver only disappointment, but there was something different in Nate's eyes. It wasn't desperate passion, it was commitment. A man who had made a choice and was willing to bear the consequences. "If you hurt her," Nicole said, her voice low but filled with threat, "there won't be money in the world that can protect you from me." Nate turned to her and nodded respectfully. "Fair, and you have every right to hate me if I do that, but I won't." Jocelyn closed her eyes, feeling hot tears stream down her cheeks, because she wanted to believe. God, she wanted to believe that this time could be different, that she wouldn't be abandoned again when things got hard, that love wasn't just a pretty word used by people who give up when reality shows its teeth. "I'm so scared," she admitted, finally looking at him. "Scared of giving myself and you realizing I'm not worth it, that I'm too much baggage, that the baby is too much complication. Afraid I'll wake up one day and you'll be gone, like everyone else." Nate took her hands, pressed them to his chest, where his heart beat strong and desperate. "Feel that? This heart only started beating for real again when you came into my life. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend every day proving I won't leave." The nurse appeared at the door, calling Jocelyn's name for the appointment. But no one moved. The moment was suspended, fragile, as if a breath of wind could shatter it all. Jocelyn looked at the white flowers in his hands, simple, honest, unpretentious. Looked at his tired face, at the red-rimmed eyes from sleepless nights, and then, slowly, as if leaping off a cliff without knowing if there was a safety net below, she nodded. "I don't want to live without you either. But you need to understand, it's not just about me now. It's about this baby. And if you stay, you have to stay for real. You can't change your mind when things get hard.
Nate smiled for the first time in weeks, a small, relieved smile full of gratitude. "I won't change my mind." He stood, helping her rise from the chair, and together they walked toward the consultation room. Nicole stayed behind, watching, still wary, but with a slightly lighter heart. And it was when Jocelyn took the first step that she felt it, a sharp, sudden pain cutting through her abdomen. She stopped, hand flying to her belly, her face paling. "Nate!" The whisper came frightened. He grabbed her immediately, alert. "What is it? What's happening?" Another pain, stronger this time, and then the warm liquid running down her legs. Her water had broken. The baby was coming, and the whole world stopped.
The hospital corridors stretched endlessly, its harsh fluorescent lights glaring down, the sound of Nate's shoes striking the floor echoing like drum beats heralding something monumental. Jocelyn sat in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse, contractions coming in waves, closer and closer, stealing her breath. Nate walked beside her, holding her hand tightly enough to hurt, but she squeezed back, because that shared pain was the only thing keeping her anchored while fear threatened to swallow her whole. "You're not going to leave me, right?" she asked between contractions, eyes wide, vulnerable. He bent down, kissed her forehead with tenderness that dispelled every doubt. "Not if the whole world caught fire. I'm staying." The delivery room was small, clinical, far from the luxurious suites Nate's money could have afforded. But there was no time for transfers, no time for elaborate preparations. The baby had set her own schedule, arriving with urgency, as if she knew her parents had waited long enough to be together. Jocelyn was placed on the bed, monitors started beeping, and the doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and steady hands, entered briskly, assessing the situation with professional efficiency. "It's okay, dear. You're doing so well. We're going to bring this baby into the world together." Jocelyn wanted to believe her, but fear was stronger than trust. The following hours were a mix of intense pain and surreal moments of clarity. Nate never let go of her hand. Not when she screamed, not when she begged for it to stop because she couldn't endure it any longer. He stayed there, whispering words of encouragement she could barely hear over her own heart thundering in her ears. "You are the strongest person I know," he said, gently wiping the sweat from her brow. "You survived so much. You'll survive this too, I promise." There was something in the firmness of his voice, in the solid presence beside her, that made Jocelyn believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone this time, that abandonment wasn't inevitable. An hour later, Nicole arrived, breathless, carrying a bag of clean clothes, a mix of panic and hope in her expression. She stayed outside the room as no more than one companion was allowed, but Martha Green appeared shortly after, coming straight from the mansion as soon as Nate had called. The two women, so different yet united by love for the same person, sat side by side in the waiting room. Martha held a small bouquet of fresh herbs from the mansion's kitchen, rosemary, basil, thyme, still with dirt clinging to the roots. "It's an old tradition," she explained to Nicole, tears in her eyes. "Plant herbs when a child is born. It represents growth, renewal, hope that the future will be better than the past." Nicole, never spiritual before, held the herbs with reverence, as if they were sacred. Jocelyn's scream echoed down the corridor, a primal, visceral cry from a place deeper than mere physical pain. And then, miraculously, another sound, the sharp, indignant, glorious cry of a newborn. The doctor held the baby, a tiny girl, small but with powerful lungs, and placed her on Jocelyn's chest. The world stopped. Time froze. Every cruel headline, every malicious judgment, every night of loneliness and fear simply vanished. Nothing mattered now except this child, warm, wet, perfect, breathing for the first time in the arms of those who had loved her before even meeting her.
Jocelyn cried, not from pain, but from relief, so profound it seemed to overflow from her body. She looked at her daughter, closed eyes, tiny fists, mouth instinctively searching for the breast, and felt something heal within herself. All the wounds of abandonment, all the scars of rejection, all the poisonous beliefs that she wasn't worthy of love began to dissolve in the undeniable reality that she had just created something extraordinary. "Hi, my love," she whispered, voice thick. "I've waited so long for you, and you're worth every second of fear I felt." Nate stood beside her, tears streaming freely, his hand trembling as he gently touched the baby's head. "She's perfect," he said, awestruck. "You two are perfect." The nurse took the baby for initial care, and for a moment, Jocelyn and Nate were alone in the room, exhausted, transformed, reborn alongside their child. He leaned down and kissed her, not with passion, but with gratitude, with promise, with the kind of love that doesn't need words because it has already been proven in actions. "You changed the course of my life," he said, forehead resting against hers. Jocelyn smiled, weak but genuine, eyes shining with a long-lost sense of peace. "No," she replied softly. "You gave meaning to mine." And there, in that simple hospital room, with the antiseptic smell mingling with the faint perfume of the white flowers Nate had brought, two broken hearts finally understood that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before the pain. It means becoming someone new, stronger, wiser, and having the courage to believe that love, the true, lasting kind, still exists.
3 months after the birth of Helena, a name Jocelyn chose because it means light, the Callahan mansion had changed completely. Not in structure, but in essence. Now there was the smell of bread baking every morning, the sound of a baby's cry echoing through the halls, laughter shared in the kitchen at noon. Martha had planted herbs in the backyard, creating a small garden that grew green and strong, a silent witness that where there is care, there is life. And Jocelyn, who once sat alone on a rain-soaked sidewalk believing the world had ended, now held her daughter in her arms, while Nate prepared breakfast, still clumsy, but always trying. The press eventually lost interest, as it always does. The headlines were replaced by other scandals, other lives turned into disposable entertainment. Peter Lawson never showed up again, and Nate didn't miss him. He had learned that some people protect images, and some people protect souls, and he had chosen the latter. Nicole visited every week, bringing over-the-top gifts for her goddaughter and teasing Nate with sharp jokes, but always with a smile that betrayed her approval. And Jocelyn, for the first time in her life, had something she had always wanted but never dared to name: a family. Not everything was perfect. There were nights when Helena wouldn't stop crying and exhaustion left emotions raw. There were moments when Jocelyn still looked at Nate, expecting him to disappear, believing it was all too good to be true. But then he stayed, and stayed again, and kept staying, until fear was replaced by the quiet certainty that some people really don't leave. Just as she discovered that love can change everything, each of us carries the power to transform within ourselves. The power to choose to believe even after being hurt. The power to start over even when the past insists on pulling you back.
Stories like this remind us that it is never too late to start over and believe in love. That past wounds do not define the future. That two broken hearts can find each other, and instead of destroying one another, can heal together. Jocelyn and Nate proved that true love is not the absence of fear, it is feeling fear and choosing to stay anyway. It is sharing pots, midnight conversations, and the sacred responsibility of creating a life. It is seasoning your own path with courage, tenderness, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here. Because as long as hearts keep beating, there will be love stories waiting to be told. And we will be here, ready to share each one with you.